Picture this: a flickering flame, eternal and unyielding, tended by women whose very existence was woven into the fate of Rome itself. These were the Vestal Virgins, priestesses unlike any other in the ancient world. Chosen as young girls, they stepped into a life of immense power and profound sacrifice, their hands keeping alive the sacred fire that symbolized Rome's survival. But their influence stretched far beyond the temple walls. They could pardon the condemned, sway the decisions of emperors, and even intervene in matters of state. How did a group of women, bound by vows of chastity, become such pivotal figures in one of history's most formidable empires? The answer lies in a story of devotion, secrecy, and a legacy that defies time. To understand the Vestal Virgins is to step into a world where myth and history blur. According to legend, their order was founded by Numa Pompilius, Rome's second king, who believed their purity would protect the city's divine favor. For over 1,000 years, these women served as the spiritual heart of Rome, their lives a delicate balance of privilege and peril. They enjoyed honors reserved for the elite front row seats at gladiatorial games, the right to own property, and the power to free prisoners with a single touch. Yet one misstep, one broken vow, could lead to a fate more terrifying than death itself. Buried alive in a sealed chamber beneath the city, their punishment served as a grim reminder of the stakes of their sacred duty. But what was daily life like for these enigmatic women? Behind the grandeur of their public roles lay a world of rigid rituals and hidden struggles. They lived in the House of the Vestals, a sprawling complex near the Roman Forum, where every action, from the way they dressed to the food they ate, was dictated by tradition. Their hair was styled in intricate braids, their robes woven with symbols of purity. They tended the sacred flame day and night, for its extinction was seen as an omen of disaster. Yet, despite their isolation, they were far from powerless. Emperors sought their counsel, generals begged for their blessings, and the people revered them as living bridges between the mortal and divine. So why, then, does their story remain so shrouded in mystery? Together, we'll unravel the truths behind the legends, exploring how these women shaped Rome's destiny while navigating a world that both worshipped and feared them. By the end, you'll see why the Vestal Virgins were far more than mere priestesses. They were the keepers of Rome's soul. The origins of the Vestal Virgins trace back to the very foundations of Rome, where myth and history intertwine like the sacred flames they guarded. Legend tells us their order was established by Numa Pompilius, Rome's second king, and a ruler known for his piety. He believed that the favor of the gods depended on the purity of those who tended Vesta's flame, the goddess whose hearth symbolized the lifeblood of the city. But this wasn't just about ritual, it was about survival. The flame's endurance mirrored Rome's own, and its keepers became living embodiments of the empire's divine contract. Choosing a Vestal Virgin was no simple matter. Girls between the ages of 6 and 10 were selected from Rome's most prestigious families, their youth ensuring they could serve the full 30-year term, a decade of training, a decade of service, and a decade of teaching the next generation. The selection process, known as the captio, was steeped in ceremony. The Pontifex Maximus, Rome's high priest, would inspect each candidate as if she were a sacred offering, checking for physical perfection and unblemished lineage. Once chosen, she was whisked away from her family, her hair ceremonially cut, and her childhood clothes replaced with the white robes of her new life. In that moment, she ceased to be a daughter of Rome and became its spiritual daughter, bound to the goddess above all else. But why such extreme measures? The Vestal's chastity was not just a personal vow, it was a cosmic safeguard. Romans believed that any breach of their purity would bring calamity upon the city, and history records terrifying moments when the sacred flame flickered out, sparking panic in the streets. During the tumultuous reign of Emperor Nero, for instance, the fire's sudden extinction was seen as an omen of the Great Fire of Rome, which nearly destroyed the city. The Vestals' role as intermediaries between mortals and gods meant their actions carried weight far beyond the temple walls. Even emperors hesitated to cross them, knowing their influence could sway public opinion or, worse, invite divine wrath. Over centuries, their duties expanded beyond the flame. They guarded sacred relics, including the Palladium, a statue of Athena believed to have been rescued from Troy, and presided over rituals that ensured fertile harvests and military victories. Yet their power came at a price. The same society that revered them also policed them with brutal severity. A Vestal accused of breaking her vows faced a trial so secretive that even the details of her alleged crime were whispered rather than recorded. If found guilty, she was buried alive in an underground chamber with only a loaf of bread and a lamp, left to the mercy of the gods. Few fates in Rome were as horrifying or as symbolic. Her execution wasn't just a punishment, it was a purification, a way to cleanse the city of her perceived sin. The Vestal Virgins were more than priestesses. They were Rome's spiritual armor, their lives a delicate dance between reverence and fear. To understand their legacy is to glimpse the heart of an empire that saw itself as eternal, a flame that, like the one they tended, would never be allowed to die. Imagine being a child of 6, playing in the sunlit courtyards of Rome, when suddenly your life changes forever. A priest arrives, declares you chosen by the gods, and whisks you away to a world of sacred fires and solemn vows. This was the reality for the young girls selected to become Vestal Virgins, a process so steeped in ritual that even the act of choosing them was considered divinely guided. The lottery system, known as the sortitio, wasn't left to mere chance. Before names were drawn, the Pontifex Maximus would scrutinize every candidate, ensuring she met the exacting standards of physical flawlessness and noble ancestry. Any hint of imperfection, a scar, a limp, or even a family rumor could disqualify her before the lottery even began. But why such extreme measures? The Romans believed the Vestal's purity wasn't just symbolic, it was the literal glue holding their world together. A single, flawed priestess might anger Vesta, risking everything from failed harvests to military defeats. This belief was so deeply ingrained that families considered it both a privilege and a duty to offer their daughters. To refuse was almost unheard of, not just because of the honor involved, but because of the consequences. Rejecting the summons was seen as defying the gods themselves, an act that could bring shame or even divine retribution upon the entire household. Historical accounts suggest some families went to great lengths to hide their daughters during selections, though few succeeded. The state's reach was long, and the prestige of producing a Vestal often outweighed a parent's reluctance. Once chosen, the girl's transition was swift and irreversible. Her hair, a symbol of her youth, was sheared off in a ceremonial act of rebirth. Her childhood toys and clothes were replaced with the stark white robes of her new station. From that moment forward, she belonged not to her family but to the goddess. The separation was so absolute that even her legal status changed. She was freed from her father's authority, a rare autonomy for any woman in Rome. Yet this freedom came with chains of its own. Her every movement, her meals, even her sleep schedule were dictated by ritual. The 30-year commitment was divided into 3 clear phases. The first decade was spent learning the intricate rituals, how to tend the sacred flame without letting it die, how to prepare the mola salsa, the sacred salt cake used in state ceremonies. The second decade was for active service, where she'd perform these rites with precision. The final 10 years were spent teaching the next generation, ensuring the traditions endured. Only after completing this marathon of devotion could a Vestal retire, though few left the order entirely. Many chose to stay, their loyalty to Vesta outweighing the allure of a life outside the temple walls. What's striking is how little say these girls had in their own futures. Unlike other priestly roles in Rome, which adults could choose, the Vestal selection hinged on childhood innocence, a quality that couldn't be acquired later. This paradox lies at the heart of their story, women wielding immense power in a society that gave them no say in how they obtained it. Their influence was undeniable, yet their personal agency was often an illusion. Even their famed privileges, the front row seats at games, the right to own property, were less about empowerment and more about maintaining the sacred distance between them and ordinary citizens. The selection process reveals a fascinating tension in Roman values. On one hand, the Vestals were celebrated as Rome's spiritual guardians. On the other, their lives were a testament to how far the state would go to control the divine. Their stories force us to ask, can true honor exist without choice? And what does it mean when a society elevates women to pedestals only to imprison them there? The answers lie not in the grand temples they inhabited, but in the silent struggles of the girls who walked those halls, their footsteps echoing through history. The Atrium Vestae wasn't just a home, it was a world unto itself, a sanctuary of marble and tradition where the Vestal Virgins walked the line between mortal and divine. Nestled beside the bustling Roman Forum, their residence stood as a paradox, a place of seclusion at the heart of the empire's chaos. Each morning began before sunrise, with the eldest Vestal stirring the sacred flame, her breath mingling with the smoke as she whispered prayers to Vesta. This wasn't mere routine, it was a sacred contract. The fire's survival meant Rome's survival, and its tenders moved with a precision that bordered on reverence. Yet their days held more than rituals. Unlike most Roman women, the Vestals managed their own finances, buying and selling property with a level of autonomy unheard of in their time. Surviving records show one Vestal loaning money to senators, another owning sprawling estates outside the city. Their wealth wasn't just personal, it funded public works, from aqueducts to temples, blurring the line between priestess and patron. And when they stepped beyond the atrium's walls, their presence commanded instant respect. At the Colosseum, they occupied seats reserved for emperors. In courtrooms, their testimony could sway verdicts without cross-examination. A single nod from a Vestal might spare a prisoner's life, their authority so unquestioned that even the most powerful men hesitated to contradict them. But privilege came with relentless scrutiny. Every meal they ate was prepared under strict purity laws: no meat, no leavened bread during certain festivals, and wine poured only from sanctified vessels. Their iconic white robes, fastened with intricate brooches, were woven by their own hands, a symbol of their self-sufficiency. Even their hair, styled in the ancient 6 braids of the brides of Vesta, was a public statement. A single loose strand could spark rumors of impropriety, and gossip in Rome spread faster than wildfire. The atrium itself mirrored this duality, part cloister, part political hub. Its courtyards bloomed with sacred herbs used in rituals, while its reception halls hosted senators seeking divine favor. Behind closed doors, the Vestals debated theology with philosophers and stored wills for Rome's elite, their vaults safeguarding secrets that could topple dynasties. Yet at night, when the city slept, they walked the same corridors where, centuries earlier, a Vestal accused of breaking her vows might have been led to her doom. The weight of that history hung in the air, a silent reminder that their freedoms were fragile, bound to a flame that could never be allowed to fade. What's remarkable is how they navigated this labyrinth of expectation. Some Vestals left behind letters hinting at quiet rebellions, commissioning portraits that showed them with unbound hair, or sneaking scrolls of poetry into their chambers. Others embraced their role with fierce devotion, like Oxia, who served for 57 years, outliving emperors and becoming a living relic of Rome's past. Their lives were a tapestry of contradictions, isolated yet influential, feared yet revered, bound by ancient rules yet wielding power that shaped an empire. To step into the Atrium Vestae was to witness the impossible women who, in a world built for men, became the keepers of Rome's soul. The flame in Vesta's temple wasn't just fire, it was Rome's heartbeat, pulsing in time with the empire's fate. Every spark, every tendril of smoke carried divine meaning. The Vestals didn't merely tend it, they communed with it, their rituals so precise that even the type of wood mattered. Only fruit-bearing trees were deemed pure enough, fig, apple, or pear chosen because their life-giving bounty mirrored the flame's role as sustainer of Rome. A single log placed at the wrong angle, a breath too close, and the fire might gutter, and if it died, the consequences were unthinkable. Keeping it alive required more than vigilance, it demanded sacred engineering. The temple's circular shape wasn't just architectural tradition. It mimicked the round huts of Rome's earliest days, creating a current of air that fed the flames without sudden drafts. The Vestals mastered this delicate balance, shielding the fire with bronze fans while never letting metal touch it directly, a taboo rooted in ancient beliefs about corruption. At night, they banked the embers beneath a layer of ash, a technique passed down through generations. The slightest change in the flame's color, a flicker too orange or a hiss too loud, could send them scrambling to interpret the god's displeasure. Negligence carried brutal penalties. Historical accounts describe Vestals whipped by the Pontifex Maximus for letting the fire wane, their backs striped with lash marks as warnings against complacency. Yet the greater fear wasn't punishment, it was the omen. When the flames sputtered out during Sulla's dictatorship, Romans flooded the streets in panic, convinced the Republic would fall. The Vestals didn't just relight it, they performed days of purification rites, begging Vesta's forgiveness with offerings of salt cakes baked in sacred clay pots. But the fire's true secret lay in its duality. Though guarded by virgins, it symbolized both destruction and fertility, an irony not lost on Rome's poets. Ovid wrote of Vestals collecting glowing coals to kindle bonfires at the Forticidia festival, where pregnant cows were sacrificed to ensure bountiful harvests. The same flame that purified also transformed, its heat forging Rome's destiny. Perhaps most fascinating is what archaeologists found centuries later: layers of charcoal beneath the temple, proof that the fire burned continuously for over 1,000 years. In a world without matches or lighters, that wasn't just devotion, it was a triumph of will over physics. The Vestals didn't just keep a fire alive, they kept Rome's soul alight, one carefully placed log at a time. In a world where women were expected to remain in the shadows, the Vestal Virgins moved through Rome's political arena with a quiet authority that left even senators in awe. Their power wasn't written in laws or decrees, it flowed from something far more potent, the unshakable belief that they spoke with the voice of the gods. When a Vestal walked into a courtroom, her testimony carried weight no man could match. Unlike ordinary citizens, she didn't need to swear an oath. Her word was considered sacred by default. Historical records tell of cases where a single statement from a Vestal overturned verdicts, sparing lives with nothing more than a nod. Their influence stretched beyond the courts. During times of crisis, generals and politicians flocked to the Atrium Vestae, seeking their intercession. When Julius Caesar faced rebellion, he made sure to secure the Vestals' public support, knowing their endorsement would sway the masses. Emperors like Augustus went further, weaving the Vestals into the fabric of their propaganda. Coins minted during his reign showed them alongside deities, a visual reminder that Rome's stability rested on their purity. Even the notoriously ruthless Nero, who had no qualms about silencing critics, tread carefully around the Vestals. Their moral authority was a force even he couldn't afford to ignore. But how did women bound by vows of chastity become such skilled political operators? The answer lies in their unique position as both insiders and outsiders. Barred from marriage, they had no husbands or children to cloud their loyalties, a neutrality that made them ideal mediators. When patrician families feuded, it was often a Vestal who brokered peace, her impartiality beyond question. They also served as keepers of wills, including those of emperors, giving them access to secrets that could make or break dynasties. One striking example comes from the reign of Tiberius, when a Vestal named Junia Torquata reportedly intervened to prevent the execution of a senator, using her access to his private documents to prove his innocence. Yet their power had limits. The same society that revered them could turn vicious if their purity was questioned. A Vestal's political maneuvering had to be flawless, her reputation spotless. Any hint of scandal, real or fabricated, could undo centuries of trust. When Emperor Domitian accused 3 Vestals of breaking their vows, their executions were as much about politics as piety. By eliminating them, he silenced potential critics and reinforced his image as Rome's moral enforcer. The Vestal's legacy is a paradox: women who shaped an empire while wearing the invisible chains of ritual. They remind us that power in ancient Rome wasn't always about who held the sword. Sometimes it was about who tended the flame. The vow of chastity wasn't just a rule for the Vestal Virgins, it was the very foundation of their power, and its violation was treated as treason against Rome itself. But behind the solemn oaths and sacred rituals lay a darker truth. Accusations of impurity were often less about piety and more about politics. Take the trial of Cornelia, the last known Vestal to face execution in the 1st century. Charged during Emperor Domitian's reign, her case reveals how easily faith could be weaponized. Domitian, desperate to prove his moral rigor after a series of scandals, ordered her buried alive in a subterranean chamber near the Colline Gate, along with 2 other Vestals accused alongside her. What's chilling isn't just the punishment, it's the flimsiness of the evidence. Ancient sources like Plutarch hint that Cornelia's real crime wasn't lost virtue, but her family's ties to Domitian's rivals. This pattern wasn't unique. Centuries earlier, during the Punic Wars, Rome faced crushing defeats, and the desperate public demanded scapegoats. 3 Vestals, Emilia, Licinia, and Marcia, were abruptly accused of impropriety. 2 were executed while 1 took her own life. Only later did a priest confess to fabricating the charges, admitting the women were sacrificed to calm the gods and the mob. Even the legendary trial of Minutia in the 4th century BC reeks of manipulation. After a slave claimed she'd broken her vows, investigators found her dressed too elegantly, her hair too carefully arranged. Her guilt was decided not by proof, but by aesthetics, a reminder that in Rome, perception could be deadlier than fact. The mechanics of these trials were as theatrical as they were terrifying. A Vestal accused of impurity faced a tribunal of priests and senators, but unlike Roman courts, she had no advocate, no right to confront witnesses. The proceedings were shrouded in secrecy, with verdicts often leaked to the public before formal announcements. If condemned, she was paraded through the streets in a funeral procession, dressed in her shroud as citizens looked on in silence. The burial site, a small underground cell with a loaf of bread and a lamp, was deliberately symbolic. Unlike common criminals, Vestals weren't executed by blade or noose. Their deaths mirrored their duty, entombed like the sacred relics they guarded. Yet for every Cornelia, there were Vestals who survived accusations through sheer influence. When a Vestal named Tuccia was accused in the 3rd century BCE, she famously carried water in a sieve to prove her purity, a miracle that silenced her critics. Others relied on powerful allies. The Vestal Fabia, sister of a prominent senator, weathered allegations only after her brother rallied the Senate in her defense. These exceptions expose the double standard. Justice for Vestals depended less on truth than on who stood to gain from their downfall. What's haunting is how little it took to unravel a Vestal's life. A jealous rival's whisper, a political enemy's ambition, or even a bad harvest could ignite suspicions. Their chastity was both shield and vulnerability, a source of authority that could be turned against them in an instant. To study their trials isn't just to examine ancient justice, it's to witness how easily fear and power can corrupt the sacred. The Vestals didn't just tend Rome's flame, they were burned by its shadows. The white robes of the Vestal Virgins weren't just clothing. They were a language, every fold and stitch whispering secrets about their sacred role. Unlike the vibrant hues worn by Rome's elite, their stark white linen symbolized unbroken purity, a visual oath to the goddess Vesta. But look closer, and you'll find layers of meaning woven into every thread. The robes were fastened with intricate fibulae, bronze clasps shaped like flames, a constant reminder of the fire they guarded. Their borders carried a subtle crimson stripe, the same shade as the bridal veil, a nod to their paradoxical title as Brides of Rome. Their headdresses told an even more complex story. The suffibulum, a ceremonial veil, was draped so precisely that its folds formed 6 distinct layers, mirroring the 6 Vestals serving at any time. Beneath it, their hair was braided in the ancient style of Roman brides, a ritual hairstyle so elaborate it took hours to complete. Yet unlike actual brides, their locks were never adorned with jewels or gold. This deliberate simplicity spoke volumes. They were wedded not to men, but to the city itself. Even their footwear held significance. While most Roman women wore sandals, Vestals strode in calci, soft leather shoes reserved for priests and senators. This wasn't just practical, it marked their feet as too sacred to touch bare ground in public. Every aspect of their appearance served as armor against the mortal world, setting them apart without a single spoken word. The rituals surrounding their attire were just as revealing. Twice a year during the Vestalia festival, they washed Vesta's statue in the Tiber, their robes billowing in the river currents. Witnesses described how the linen seemed to glow underwater, a spectacle so mesmerizing it silenced entire crowds. On these rare occasions, the public glimpsed the human beneath the holiness, a fleeting reminder that divinity cloaked flesh and blood. Archaeologists uncovering fragments of Vestal garments have found traces of myrrh and saffron in the fibers, suggesting they were perfumed for ceremonies. This small detail shatters the stereotype of austere priestesses. They understood the power of presence, of scent as much as sight. Their fashion wasn't just tradition, it was theater, a performance of purity that shaped how Rome saw itself. To wear white in a city of scarlet and gold was to become a living flame, visible against the darkness, burning with a purpose beyond mortal comprehension. The marble halls of the Atrium Vestae echoed not just with prayers, but with the murmurs of scholars. While most Roman women were barred from formal education, Vestal Virgins pored over scrolls of philosophy. debated legal principles, and composed poetry privileges that set them apart in a society where even elite men often viewed female intellect with suspicion. Their curriculum was as rigorous as it was rare, mastering the works of Greek thinkers like Pythagoras, dissecting Roman law codes, and even studying astronomy to calculate festival dates with celestial precision. Ancient sources mention Vestals like Tarpeia, whose treatises on religious jurisprudence were cited in Senate debates, and Junia Severa, whose translations of Egyptian texts helped shape Rome's understanding of foreign rituals. This intellectual freedom wasn't accidental. The Romans believed a Vestal's mind needed to be as disciplined as her body, her purity of thought as vital as her physical chastity. Philosophy wasn't just academic, it was spiritual armor. Stoicism, with its emphasis on self-control, became a cornerstone of their training. Letters attributed to the Vestal Claudia, though likely embellished over time, describe how Seneca himself reportedly sent her personal meditations on resilience, praising her ability to tend wisdom like the sacred flame. Their education also had intensely practical sides. They memorized every clause of the 12 Tables, Rome's foundational legal code, since their role as will keepers and arbitrators required instant recall of inheritance laws. Yet their greatest scholarly contribution may have been preserving knowledge itself. During the Gallic sack of Rome in the 4th century BCE, while senators fled, Vestals reportedly smuggled sacred texts to safety in terracotta jars, an act that arguably saved Rome's religious identity. Later, they became unofficial archivists, storing not just wills but rare manuscripts in their temple's subterranean chambers. The irony is palpable. Women forbidden from bearing children became midwives to ideas that outlived empires. What survives of their writings are fragments, a line of poetry quoted by Aulus Gellius, a legal opinion cited in Cicero's letters. The rest has vanished, likely purged by later Christian scribes who saw their pagan intellect as dangerous. But their legacy lingers in unexpected places. When Cornelia Africana, mother of the Gracchi, famously declared her children were her jewels, she was likely echoing a Vestal maxim about valuing wisdom over wealth. Even the layout of their library scrolls, arranged in concentric circles around the sacred flame, hints at how they viewed knowledge, not as linear, but as a never-ending loop of learning and devotion. Their story forces us to reconsider ancient education itself. In a world where most women's voices were silenced, the Vestals proved that some flames, those of the mind, burned too brightly to be extinguished. The Vestalia wasn't just a festival, it was Rome's spiritual lifeline, a 7-day whirlwind of flower, fire, and fervor where the Vestal Virgins stepped from the shadows into the spotlight. Held each June, this sacred week transformed the normally off-limits temple of Vesta into a hive of public devotion. The streets leading to the forum would swell with Roman matrons, barefoot in a rare act of humility, carrying offerings of bread and fruit to the goddess. But the true spectacle unfolded inside, where the Vestals performed rituals so ancient even they didn't know their full origins. At the heart of it all was the mola salsa, sacred bread made from the first ears of spring wheat, ground by hand and mixed with water drawn from a secret spring. What made this recipe extraordinary wasn't just its ingredients, but how they were prepared. The water had to be carried in a vessel that never touched the ground, the wheat ground on a stone altar using a mortar blessed by the Pontifex Maximus. Every step was choreographed like a celestial dance, with the Vestals moving in perfect sync around the sacred flame. Yet the Vestalia's magic extended beyond the temple walls. For 1 week, Rome's rigid social hierarchies softened. Millers decorated their donkeys with flower garlands, bakers hung their tools above their doors, and even slaves were permitted to feast, all in honor of Vesta's generosity. The festival's climax came on the 15th day, when the Vestals swept the temple's ashes into the Tiber, purifying the city symbolically and literally. Ovid's writings describe how crowds would line the riverbanks, watching as the grey dust swirled into the current, believing it carried away Rome's accumulated sins. This wasn't mere pageantry, it was communal catharsis, a chance for the entire city to reset its spiritual balance. Other festivals revealed different facets of the Vestal's public role. During the Forticidia in April, they kindled bonfires using coals from Vesta's flame, their hands guiding the spread of sacred fire across the city's 7 hills. At the October horse ceremony, they preserved the blood of sacrificed steeds, a potent charm against bad harvests. Each ritual served as a reminder that Rome's survival depended on these women's labors. Even their rare public appearances were carefully staged. When a Vestal walked through the forum, attendants cleared her path with white cloths, ensuring her feet never touched profane ground. Citizens believed even her shadow carried blessings, and children would dart forward to touch the hem of her robe for luck. What's striking is how these ceremonies blurred sacred and secular power. When the Vestals baked the mola salsa, that same bread would later be crumbled over sacrificial animals at state functions, linking their kitchen work to military triumphs and political oaths. A general heading to war knew his victory might hinge on whether the Vestals had properly blessed his ceremonial feast. Their rituals weren't just religious acts, they were the unseen gears turning Rome's imperial machine. To witness the Vestalia was to see the invisible threads connecting hearth to empire, flower to conquest, and the hands of priestesses to the destiny of millions. The festivals also offered rare glimpses of the women behind the vows. During the quiet moments between rituals, Vestals were known to distribute honey cakes to street children or pause to listen to a beggar's plea. These small acts of kindness, recorded in graffiti and personal letters, hint at a humanity often overshadowed by their divine aura. A poem scrawled on a Pompeian wall praises a Vestal who intervened to save a merchant's son from debt slavery during the festival's truce. Another account tells of Licinia, who secretly funded a school for orphans using festival alms. Their public roles may have been scripted, but their choices in those roles revealed individual hearts beating beneath the white robes. By the empire's twilight, these festivals had become more than tradition, they were acts of defiance. As Christianity spread, the Vestals clung to their rituals with renewed intensity, their bonfires burning brighter against the gathering dark. When the Emperor Gratian finally extinguished Vesta's flame in 394, it wasn't just a religious change. It was the end of a 1,000-year conversation between priestesses and people. The festivals that once united Rome now lived only in memory, their bread uneaten, their fires cold, their sacred sweepings forever lost to the Tiber's current. The threat of punishment loomed over every Vestal Virgin like a shadow, a constant reminder that their sacred vows carried mortal consequences. Ancient sources speak of horrific penalties, whippings, starvation, live burial, but how often did these sentences actually unfold? The truth is more nuanced than the legends suggest. In over 1,000 years of recorded history, fewer than 20 documented cases exist of Vestals facing execution, with most clustered during times of political upheaval or military crisis. This pattern hints that their punishments were less about justice and more about spectacle, a way for leaders to redirect public fear during turbulent eras. Take the trial of the Vestals Aemilia, Licinia, and Marcia during the Second Punic War. As Hannibal's armies ravaged Italy, panic gripped Rome. The Senate, desperate for divine intervention, seized upon rumors that the Vestals had broken their vows. 2 were buried alive near the Colline Gate, the third died by her own hand. Yet years later, a priest admitted the charges were fabricated, a chilling admission that these women were sacrificed not for impurity, but to appease a terrified populace. Their deaths served as a grim kind of theater, reinforcing the idea that Rome's troubles stemmed from moral decay rather than military failure. The mechanics of these executions reveal even deeper layers of symbolism. A condemned Vestal wasn't simply killed, she was ritually returned to the earth. Dressed in funeral garments, she was placed in an underground cell with a loaf of bread, a lamp, and a handful of sacred objects mocking the very tools of her office. The message was clear: her betrayal had severed her connection to both gods and mortals, leaving her suspended between worlds. Unlike common criminals, she wasn't executed by human hands. The chamber's door was sealed, leaving her fate to the gods. This elaborate ritual transformed punishment into a purification rite, a way to cleanse the city of her alleged sin. Yet the Vestals' greatest protection wasn't their piety, it was their political utility. Emperors like Augustus understood that harming them risked alienating the public, whose faith in Rome's stability was tied to the Vestals' inviolability. When accusations arose during his reign, he famously intervened, insisting on trials so meticulous that few convictions followed. The Vestal Cornelia, tried under Domitian, stands as a rare exception, her execution likely fueled by the emperor's need to assert control after a series of scandals. Even then, ancient historians like Pliny the Younger expressed skepticism, noting how conveniently her death distracted from Domitian's own excesses. Behind the sensational stories lies a quieter truth. Most Vestals completed their service without incident. The harsh penalties were less a daily threat than a deterrent, their very rarity reinforcing their power. A Vestal's life was difficult enough: 30 years of rigid rituals, constant scrutiny, and the weight of Rome's spiritual survival on her shoulders. The real punishment for most wasn't execution, but the relentless pressure of perfection, the knowledge that one misstep could erase centuries of honor. Their legacy endures not because of how they died, but because of how they lived, walking the razor's edge between reverence and fear, their fates a mirror of Rome's own fragile divinity. The financial independence of the Vestal Virgins set them apart in a world where most women couldn't own property without male guardians. Unlike their peers, Vestals controlled vast estates, received inheritances, and even loaned money to Rome's most powerful men, privileges that made them some of the wealthiest individuals in the empire. Their wealth wasn't just personal, it was political. Surviving records show Vestals like Campia Severina owning vineyards in Campania and apartment blocks in Rome's busiest districts, their names etched into rental contracts alongside senators. One particularly striking example comes from the reign of Trajan, when the Vestal Pomponia Rufina financed the restoration of an aqueduct after state funds ran dry. Her contribution so substantial that the Senate voted her a public statue, an honor almost unheard of for women. But how did priestesses sworn to chastity amass such fortunes? The answer lies in their unique legal status. Freed from their father's authority upon taking their vows, Vestals could inherit, invest, and sue in court like male citizens. Wealthy families often named them in wills, trusting their impartiality to distribute assets fairly. Emperors like Augustus even designated Vestals as executors of imperial wills, knowing their sacred role deterred forgery or theft. Their financial acumen became legendary. Letters between Cicero and Atticus mention a Vestal who negotiated the sale of a gladiator troupe, her sharp eye for valuation earning her a reputation as Rome's shrewdest trader in human commodities. Yet their economic power came with strings attached. A Vestal's wealth wasn't truly hers, it belonged to the goddess. If she left the order after her 30-year term, her property reverted to the state unless she married, a rare choice most avoided to retain their status. Even in retirement, many continued managing their assets from within the Atrium Vestae, their golden years spent balancing ledgers instead of grandchildren. The few who did marry faced an ironic twist. Their fortunes suddenly fell under their husband's control, a bitter trade-off for those accustomed to autonomy. The darker side of their wealth emerged during crises. When Rome's treasury emptied during the civil wars, Vestals were pressured to donate their holdings to the state. Tiberius famously confiscated the estates of 2 retired Vestals under dubious charges of misconduct, a thinly veiled cash grab. Their riches made them targets as much as protectors. By the empire's twilight, their lands had become a lifeline for crumbling institutions, their coffers drained to fund wars and feed the poor. The same financial independence that once empowered them now bound them to Rome's decline, their gold and grain propping up an empire that would soon forget their names. What's fascinating is how their economic legacy outlived their religious role. Centuries after Vesta's flame was extinguished, medieval bankers in Rome still invoked the Vestals' names in contracts, their reputation for integrity so enduring it transcended paganism itself. Their story forces us to reconsider ancient notions of female agency, women who wielded ledgers like weapons, their fortunes a silent rebellion against the world beyond the temple walls. The vow of chastity may have severed the Vestal Virgins from marriage, but it never fully cut the bonds of blood. Behind the austere facade of their sacred duties, these women navigated surprisingly tender connections with the families they'd left behind. While Roman law declared them legally independent from their fathers, letters and inscriptions reveal how deeply they remained entwined with their kin. A 1st century epitaph commissioned by the Vestal Oxia for her mother speaks volumes. To Sulpicia, who wept the day I was taken, yet whose pride never dimmed. This duality, personal longing mingled with duty, shaped their private lives in ways historians are only beginning to understand. Their families reaped tangible rewards from these relationships. Having a Vestal in the lineage wasn't just an honor, it was a political lifeline. Ancient records show senators like the Cornelii and Julii leveraging their Vestal daughters' influence to secure favors, from tax exemptions to pardons for exiled relatives. During Claudius' reign, the Vestal Junior Torquata famously intervened to save her brother from treason charges, her plea carrying more weight than any lawyer's argument. Yet these ties weren't purely transactional. Scrolls discovered near Ostia detail how one Vestal, Licinia, secretly funded her nephew's education in Athens, sending him scrolls wrapped in her ceremonial linen to avoid suspicion. More surprising are the accounts of Vestals forming quasi-maternal bonds. Though barred from bearing children, several adopted young girls, often relatives, to raise as protégées. The practice wasn't formal adoption as Romans knew it, but a delicate workaround. These spiritual daughters lived in the Atrium Vestae, learning sacred rites while filling the emotional void left by their guardians' vows. A poignant graffito near the Temple of Vesta depicts a girl sketching her Vestal mother with a stylus, the inscription reading, "She tells me stories of Vesta, but lets me braid her hair like other mothers." The emotional toll of these arrangements surfaces in rare personal writings. A papyrus fragment preserved in Egypt, possibly from a Vestal stationed there during imperial ceremonies, confesses, "When my sister brought her newborn to the temple, I traced his fingers through the smoke, and for the first time 30 years felt like a prison." Yet others found solace in their unconventional roles. The Vestal Campia Severina's will, etched on bronze tablets, left her entire estate to her beloved niece, who called me mother when no one else could. These fragments of intimacy challenge the stereotype of Vestals as isolated ascetics. They loved, grieved, and schemed like all Romans, just within narrower walls. Their story isn't one of renunciation, but of redefinition, women who reshaped family itself, proving that even the sacred fire couldn't burn away every human tie. Sylvia wasn't just a Vestal Virgin, she was the womb of Rome itself. According to legend, this priestess of Vesta became the mother of Romulus and Remus after being visited by the god Mars, her divine pregnancy upending both her vows and the course of history. Stripped of her sacred title and imprisoned by her usurper uncle, she might have vanished into myth if not for the twins she bore, whose story would found an empire. But Rhee's tale is more than folklore. It's a window into how Vestals could become lightning rods for Rome's deepest anxieties about power, purity, and destiny. Centuries later, another Vestal etched her name into history through sheer defiance. Licinia, a priestess during the chaotic social wars, refused to surrender Rome's sacred relics even as enemy troops breached the city walls. Ancient sources describe her barricading herself in the temple, clutching the Palladium, a wooden statue believed to protect Troy and later Rome, while flames licked at the doors. Her actions weren't just bravery, they were theology in motion. By saving the relics, she became living proof that Vestals weren't merely caretakers of tradition, but active shapers of Rome's survival. Then there's Oxia, who served for 57 years longer than any recorded Vestal, bridging the tumultuous transition from republic to empire. Her tenure saw the rise and fall of Julius Caesar, the reign of Augustus, and the birth of imperial cults. While most Vestals faded into obscurity after their service, Oxia became a human archive, her memory holding rituals even the written records had forgotten. When Augustus sought to restore neglected traditions, it was Oxia's whispered knowledge that guided his reforms, her aging hands demonstrating forgotten gestures to younger priestesses. The Vestal Claudia left a different legacy. During a grain shortage, she famously intervened to protect a shipment meant for the plebs, physically blocking senators who tried to divert it to their warehouses. The incident, immortalized in poems and graffiti, reveals how Vestals could transcend their religious role to become champions of justice. What's striking is how Claudia wielded her body as a shield, her inviolable status making her untouchable even to Rome's elite. But not all famous Vestals were heroines. The case of Minutia, accused in the 3rd century BC of breaking her vows, shows how quickly reverence could turn to condemnation. Convicted based on little more than rumors about her lavish hairstyles, her execution became a cautionary tale about the fragility of a Vestal's reputation. Centuries later, the Vestal Cornelia met a similar fate under Emperor Domitian, her trial revealing how political purges could be disguised as piety. These women's stories aren't just footnotes, they're mirrors reflecting Rome's evolving soul. From Rhea Silvia's mythic sorrow to Licinia's fiery resolve, each Vestal who stepped into the historical record did so by bending the rigid framework of their role, proving that even in antiquity, individuals could reshape systems meant to confine them. Their lives whisper a truth far more compelling than legend. That history isn't made by institutions, but by the people who dare to stand at their crossroads. By the 4th century, Rome was a city caught between two worlds, one clinging to its ancient flames, the other embracing the cross. The Vestal Virgins, once untouchable symbols of imperial might, found themselves navigating a landscape where their sacred fire seemed increasingly out of place. The rise of Christianity didn't just challenge their rituals, it unraveled the very fabric of their purpose. When Emperor Constantine first legalized Christianity in 313, the Vestals still presided over festivals with their usual grandeur. But by the time Theodosius I ascended the throne decades later, their position had grown precarious. His edicts banning pagan worship in 391 didn't just target minor cults, they struck at the heart of Rome's oldest institution. The Vestals' downfall wasn't sudden, it was death by 1,000 cuts. As Christian bishops gained political clout, the Vestals' once unquestioned authority began to erode. Their festivals drew smaller crowds, their intercessions ignored by emperors who now crossed themselves rather than consult the sacred flame. The final blow came in 394, when Theodosius ordered Vesta's eternal fire extinguished and the Vestals disbanded. After nearly 1,100 years of continuous service, the order that had outlasted kings, republics, and civil wars was dissolved with a single decree. The temple doors were sealed, the sacred relics scattered, and the remaining 6 Vestals stripped of their privileges. Public reaction was mixed. Some Romans, particularly the old aristocracy, mourned openly. Senator Symmachus famously pleaded with the emperor to restore the Vestals, arguing that abandoning them would extinguish the sun rather than a flame. Christian chroniclers, however, painted their disbandment as inevitable, the triumph of true faith over superstition. What's rarely acknowledged is how many ordinary citizens simply adapted. The baker who once left offerings at Vestalia now lit candles in church. The merchant who sought Vestal blessings turned to saints instead. Rome's spiritual landscape had shifted, and with it, the Vestals became relics of a fading era. Yet their legacy proved harder to erase than their flame. For generations afterward, Roman farmers continued to whisper prayers to Vesta during harvests, and patrician families kept small household shrines mimicking her temple. The Vestals' most enduring influence, however, may have been on Christianity itself. Some scholars argue that early nuns, celibate women devoted to spiritual service, unconsciously mirrored the Vestal model, their white habits echoing the priestesses' robes. Even the Vatican's insistence on eternal flames at certain altars carries faint echoes of Vesta's vigil. The last known Vestal, Celia Concordia, faded into obscurity after the order's dissolution. But her name, meaning harmony, feels painfully ironic. The end of the Vestals wasn't harmonious, it was the quiet collapse of a world where fire and faith had once been inseparable. Their story closes not with a dramatic martyrdom, but with the slow dimming of embers and the uneasy realization that even eternity has an expiration date. Archaeologists brushing dust from the floors of the House of the Vestals didn't just uncover ruins, they found whispers of a vanished world. Among the most telling discoveries were the charred remains of grain and fruit in the temple's inner sanctum, proof that the sacred flame was more than symbolic. It cooked the mola salsa, the ritual bread Vestals prepared with flour ground by their own hands. Nearby, excavators uncovered a trove of bronze mirrors, each polished to a sheen so flawless it could still catch sunlight after 2 millennia. These weren't vanity objects, they were tools for spotting impurities in the sacred fire's smoke, their surfaces angled to reflect distortions in the rising heat. The real revelations, though, came from the graffiti. Scratched into the walls of the atrium's servant quarters were tallies of firewood deliveries, notes about festival preparations, and even a crude sketch of a Vestal braiding her hair, likely the work of a young attendant. One inscription, written in a child's uneven letters, reads, "Tertia says the flame is hungry today," a poignant glimpse into how even temple workers internalized the sacred fire's needs. More formal records survive on broken clay tablets, detailing everything from the cost of repairing a leaky roof to the shocking price of the saffron used to dye the Vestal's ceremonial ribbons. But the most electrifying find emerged near the temple's underground chamber, a collection of lead-cursed tablets, folded and pierced with nails. These weren't left by Vestals themselves, but by desperate citizens who'd slipped them into cracks in the walls, hoping the priestess's proximity to the divine would amplify their pleas. One tablet begs Vesta to punish a thief who stole a family's bread ration. Another implores the goddess to make a rival's business fail. Their presence confirms what texts only hinted at. Romans saw the Vestals not just as ritual specialists, but as living conduits to the gods. Artifacts from their living quarters paint an intimate portrait. Excavators found bone hairpins still tangled with strands of auburn hair, their tips carved into miniature axes, a nod to Vesta's association with both hearth and sacrifice. In the garden, they uncovered fossilized pomegranate seeds and fig pits, evidence of the Vestals' carefully controlled diet. Even their leisure moments left traces. A gaming board etched into a marble bench, its worn grooves suggesting countless quiet afternoons spent moving pieces under the colonnades. The temple's architecture itself held secrets. Core samples revealed layers of ash beneath the altar, confirming ancient accounts of the fire's unbroken continuity. But the real surprise came when laser scans detected faint grooves in the floor-precise channels, designed to drain spilled water away from the sacred flame. This wasn't just practicality, it was theology in stone, a physical manifestation of the Vestal's eternal vigilance. Perhaps the most haunting discovery was a small terracotta doll, tucked beneath a floor tile in the dormitory. Its arms were carefully wrapped in linen strips mimicking a Vestal's robes. Was it a votive offering, a forbidden keepsake from a girl who missed her childhood? Like so much about these women, the answer lingers just beyond reach, a silent testament to the human stories behind the legend. These fragments, charred grain and cursed lead, braided hair and drained floors, don't just reconstruct a building. They resurrect a rhythm of life where every action, no matter how mundane, was threaded with sacred purpose. To walk these ruins isn't just to study history, it's to step into the footsteps of women who carried Rome's soul in their hands, their daily lives etched not just in marble, but in the very earth beneath our feet. The Vestal Virgins stood apart in the ancient world, their role distinct even among the priestesses who tended sacred flames or channeled divine voices. Unlike the oracle priestesses of Delphi, who served as temporary vessels for Apollo's prophecies, the Vestals held permanent, lifelong authority. The Pythia of Greece might have been revered during her trances, but she returned to ordinary life afterward. No one followed her into the marketplace seeking blessings. Vestals, by contrast, carried their sanctity into every interaction, their influence woven into Rome's daily fabric. Where the Delphic oracles spoke in riddles, the Vestals acted with concrete power, their words shaping laws and pardoning prisoners. Egypt's temple priestesses present another striking contrast. Servants of Isis or Hathor often married and bore children, their duties blending seamlessly with family life. Some even passed their roles to daughters, creating dynasties of devotion. A Vestal's path was solitary by design. Her chastity wasn't just a rule but a boundary separating her from the mortal world. While Egyptian priestesses performed elaborate dances to awaken the gods, the Vestals moved in deliberate silence, their rituals precise as clockwork. The clatter of sistrums in Thebes had no counterpart in Rome. Here, the only music was the hiss of sacred flame. Yet the most revealing difference lies in their relationship to the state. Greek oracles advised cities but remained politically neutral, their caves and temples standing apart from civic centers. The Vestal's atrium, however, neighbored the Senate House, their fire directly tied to Rome's survival. When disaster struck, it wasn't a priestess of Athena who was scrutinized for impurity, it was the keepers of Vesta's flame. Their purity wasn't symbolic, it was the linchpin holding the empire together. Even their punishment set them apart. A Greek priestess accused of false prophecy might face exile, an Egyptian temple servant a fine. But a Vestal's alleged misconduct demanded ritualized execution, a reflection of how deeply Rome intertwined her body with the body politic. Where other cultures saw priestesses as intermediaries, Rome made them living sacrifices, both exalted and expendable. What emerges is a portrait of women who defied the ancient world's norms. They weren't mystics like the Pythia, nor servants like Egypt's chantresses. They were something far more potent, the human embodiment of Rome's covenant with the divine, their lives a flame that burned brighter and far more dangerously than any other. The poets of Rome didn't just write about the Vestal Virgins, they mythologized them, turning flesh and blood women into symbols of purity or peril. Ovid's Fasti paints them as ethereal figures, their white robes shimmering like moonlight as they kneel before Vesta's flame. But his verses also whisper of tension, like when he describes a Vestal's fleeting blush at a festival, hinting at desires stifled by duty. This duality, reverence laced with voyeurism, pervades ancient literature. Virgil's Aeneid goes further, casting the Vestals as Rome's spiritual shield, their very presence turning back invaders. When Aeneas carries the Palladium to safety, it's not just a statue he rescues, it's the idea that priestesses alone could safeguard the empire's soul. Artists, too, couldn't resist shaping their image. Frescoes in Pompeii show Vestals with faces serene as marble, their braided hair coiled like sacred serpents. Yet dig deeper and contradictions emerge. A recovered terracotta lamp from Ostia depicts a Vestal whispering to a shadowed figure, an ambiguous scene that fueled centuries of speculation. Was this a secret lover, a conspirator, or just an artist's flourish? Even their statues tell conflicting stories. Some portray them with downcast eyes, hands clasped in prayer, while others capture mid-stride, their robes swirling as if they'd just intervened in some mortal drama. The most revealing distortions came from Rome's enemies. Christian writers like Tertullian recast Vestals as pagan relics, their flames symbols of a dying world. In his Apologeticus, he mocks their chastity as hypocrisy, claiming their temple hid corruption beneath white linen. Yet earlier critics, like the Greek historian Dionysius, marveled at their discipline, comparing them to Sparta's warrior women. This push and pull between admiration and suspicion shaped their legacy long after their fires were doused. Perhaps no artwork captures their paradox better than the Vestal Tuccia painting rediscovered in Herculaneum. Here, the priestess balances water in a sieve, proving her purity after slander. But look closer, the artist added a crack in the sieve, a subtle nod that even miracles have limits. It's this tension between the ideal and the human that makes their artistic legacy so enduring. They weren't just priestesses frozen in verse or paint. They were mirrors reflecting Rome's deepest fears and fiercest pride. Modern retellings continue the tradition, from operas that dramatize their trials to novels casting them as proto-feminist rebels. Each era reshapes the Vestals to its own ideals. What unites these portrayals is the unspoken question: how do we reconcile power with purity, agency with tradition? The answer, like their ever-burning flame, remains just out of reach, flickering between the lines of poetry and the strokes of a brush. Hollywood loves a stereotype, especially when it comes to ancient Rome. Too often, Vestal Virgins appear on screen as little more than veiled figures clutching braziers, their faces frozen in expressions of chaste solemnity. But these depictions flatten their story into a single note, ignoring the symphony of power, strategy, and sheer grit that defined their lives, the truth. Vestals were anything but passive symbols. They were political operators, property owners, and even power brokers who navigated Rome's cutthroat elite with the skill of seasoned diplomats. Take the persistent myth that they were silent observers of history. Ancient court records tell a different tale. When the Vestal Fabia testified in a high-profile inheritance dispute, her words overturned a will that would have stripped a widow of her home. No theatrical pronouncements, just quiet, devastating influence. Even more revealing are the letters between Cicero and his friend Atticus, where they fret over a Vestal's refusal to endorse a political candidate, her neutrality costing him crucial votes. These weren't wallflowers, they were women who understood the weight of their influence and wielded it deliberately. Another modern distortion paints them as cloistered victims of patriarchy. While their chastity vows were unbreakable, their autonomy was unprecedented. Roman women couldn't even walk the streets without a male escort, yet Vestals moved freely, their presence alone enough to clear a path through crowds. They drafted contracts, purchased land, and even loaned money to senators, rights their married sisters could only dream of. Archaeology confirms this. A recovered ledger from Pompeii lists a Vestal named Caecilia Metella as the landlord of an entire insula, her tenants including a butcher, a baker, and a disgruntled poet who scratched complaints about rent into the walls. Perhaps the most damaging misconception is that they lacked personal ambition. The case of the Vestal Oxia shatters that illusion. Serving for 57 years, she didn't just preserve rituals, she expanded them, introducing new ceremonies that tied the imperial family to Vesta's cult. When Augustus sought to legitimize his rule, it was Oxia who staged his symbolic rekindling of Rome's hearth, a brilliant piece of political theater. Her longevity wasn't accidental, it was a masterclass in adapting tradition to secure relevance. Even their punishments have been sensationalized beyond recognition. Popular media often depicts their executions as frequent spectacles, ignoring the historical reality. Fewer than 20 documented cases across 11 centuries. The truth is messier and more telling. Most accusations surfaced during wars or plagues, when leaders needed scapegoats for public despair. The Vestal Cornelius trial under Domitian wasn't about piety, it was about an emperor desperate to distract from his own failures. Her burial alive wasn't justice, it was propaganda. What these myths reveal isn't ancient history, but our own discomfort with women who wield power differently. We're comfortable with Vestals as martyrs or symbols, but not as shrewd women who navigated a rigid system to carve out extraordinary lives. Their legacy isn't defined by the flames they tended, but by the shadows they cast, long, complex, and impossible to ignore. The Vestal Virgins story doesn't end with the ashes of their sacred flame. It lingers in the quiet tensions of modern power structures, where women still navigate the razor's edge between reverence and restraint. Their legacy is a paradox. These women wielded influence unmatched by most Roman citizens, yet their authority was forever bound to their purity, a trade-off that echoes in contemporary debates about agency and expectation. Think of the female religious leaders today: nuns, priestesses, rabbis who balance spiritual authority with societal limits, their voices amplified yet often filtered through ancient rules. The Vestal's existence forces us to ask, can true power exist within prescribed boundaries, or does it demand the freedom to define oneself? Consider how their financial autonomy mirrors modern strides and setbacks. Vestals controlled vast estates and funded public works, much like today's female philanthropists or CEOs. Yet their wealth wasn't truly theirs, it belonged to the goddess, just as women's economic gains today are often framed as exceptions rather than entitlements. The Vestal who loaned money to senators has a counterpart in the 21st century female executive breaking glass ceilings, only to have her leadership scrutinized through the lens of gender. The parallels are uncomfortable but illuminating. Their political role is even more telling. Vestals mediated conflicts and swayed emperors, yet their influence depended on maintaining an impossible standard of perfection. Sound familiar? Modern female politicians face similar traps, applauded for diplomacy but pilloried for ambition, their authority contingent on likability rather than legacy. The Vestal's ability to pardon prisoners with a touch finds its echo in the symbolic power of first ladies or activist icons, whose interventions are celebrated but rarely institutionalized. Perhaps their most enduring lesson lies in the price of visibility. Vestals were both protected and policed, their every move watched for signs of deviation. Today, women in leadership face comparable scrutiny, their clothing, tone, and personal lives dissected as proxies for competence. The Vestal accused of impropriety for wearing her hair too elaborately isn't so different from the politician mocked for a bold lipstick choice. The mechanisms have changed, but the instinct to conflate morality with control remains. Yet there's hope in how Vestals subverted expectations. They turned their constraints into leverage, using chastity as a shield to carve out spaces of influence. Modern parallels abound, from nuns advocating for social justice to female activists leveraging traditional roles to challenge oppressive systems. The Vestals didn't just survive their circumstances, they reinterpreted them, proving that even the strictest frameworks can harbor defiance. Their flame may be extinguished, but its light still flickers in the unresolved questions we grapple with today. How much autonomy must be sacrificed for influence? Can institutions designed to limit women ever truly empower them? The Vestal's answers were written in ash and marble, but ours are still being forged. Beneath the polished marble and recorded histories, the Vestal Virgins left behind whispers that defy easy answers. One tantalizing mystery lingers in the graffiti-scratched walls near their dormitory, a crude drawing of a woman cutting her ceremonial braids, an act punishable by scourging. Was this the work of a rebellious Vestal or merely a servant's fantasy? Ancient sources hint at quiet acts of defiance. The priestess Claudia Pulchra, accused of hosting secret poetry readings where banned verses of Sappho were recited, or the unnamed Vestal whose personal letters referenced the flame that burns beyond Vesta's sight. These fragments suggest hidden lives pulsing beneath the surface of ritual. More perplexing are the gaps in the archaeological record. Excavations at the Temple of Vesta revealed a hidden alcove behind the inner sanctum, its walls scorched not by the sacred flame but by smaller, irregular fires. Some scholars theorize this was a space for private devotions, perhaps rituals so secret even most Vestals didn't know them. Supporting this are clay tablets from Ostia listing unusual offerings, night-blooming flowers, mirrors blackened with soot, and silver needles. None appear in official religious texts. Did the Vestals preserve older, darker traditions predating Rome itself, ceremonies too potent to document? Then there's the enigma of the lost Vestals. Census records from the reign of Augustus note 6 priestesses serving concurrently, yet temple payrolls occasionally list payments for 7. One explanation points to a shadow tradition, an emergency substitute chosen in times of plague or war, her existence erased once the crisis passed. A first-century letter from a senator mentions encountering a silent sister during a midnight rite, her face veiled in linen unlike the others. Was she a ghost, a hallucination, or proof of rituals conducted beyond public view? The greatest unanswered question revolves around their influence. Ancient accounts describe Vestals intervening in battles through means never fully explained. Livy writes of a doomed army saved when a Vestal made the gods visible, while Plutarch alludes to their ability to bind men's fates with thread. Were these metaphors or evidence of practices later suppressed? A cache of lead tablets discovered near the Tiber contains cryptic etchings, not patterns, alongside names of long-dead generals, suggesting a form of ritual magic. The truth may lie somewhere between piety and power, in the spaces where faith bled into something more primal. These mysteries resist tidy conclusions because they reflect the Vestals themselves, both luminous and opaque, their full story flickering just beyond history's grasp. What we do know is this: in a civilization that documented everything from grain shipments to gladiators' wounds, some secrets were clearly worth keeping. The Vestal Virgins didn't just tend a flame, they mastered the art of endurance. Their lives are testament to how power and vulnerability can coexist. Their story isn't locked in the past. It's a mirror reflecting timeless truths about sacrifice, resilience, and the double-edged sword of privilege. Consider their 30-year service, a span longer than most Roman lifetimes, demanding unwavering devotion. Yet within those constraints, they carved out agency, owning property, influencing politics, even pardoning prisoners. Their resilience wasn't passive survival. It was strategic adaptation, a lesson for anyone navigating rigid systems today. Modern parallels emerge in unexpected places. Women in STEM balancing breakthrough innovations against institutional biases, or activists leveraging traditional platforms to challenge the status quo. The Vestals' ability to wield influence within their boundaries reminds us that change often begins not by smashing walls, but by bending them. Faith for the Vestals wasn't just belief, it was currency. Their spiritual authority granted them privileges most Roman women couldn't fathom, yet it also made them targets. When crises struck, they were the first scrutinized for divine displeasure. This paradox echoes in contemporary leaders whose visibility brings both adoration and heightened scrutiny. Think of how female politicians face disproportionate backlash for missteps their male counterparts shrug off, or how women in religious leadership navigate expectations of moral perfection. The Vestal's experience underscores a harsh truth: the higher you're elevated, the harder the fall. Their chastity vows, framed as sacred, also served as a leash, a reminder that societal reverence often comes with strings attached. Today's equivalent might be the likability trap, where women in power must balance authority with approachability, lest they be deemed too cold or too emotional. Privilege, too, carried its shadows. Vestals dined with emperors but slept in guarded dormitories. They amassed wealth but couldn't marry or bear children. Their autonomy was real, yet conditional, a duality familiar to modern women who have broken barriers only to face backlash. The Vestals' financial independence mirrors today's glass cliff, where women CEOs are handed leadership roles during crises, set up to fail under impossible expectations. And just as Vestals were scapegoated for Rome's military defeats, women today still bear disproportionate blame for institutional failures, whether in corporate collapses or political upheavals. The price of their privilege was perpetual vigilance, a reality anyone in the spotlight understands, but perhaps their most enduring lesson is in reinvention. When Christianity rose, some Vestals adapted, shifting their influence from temple to charity, much like how medieval nuns repurposed pagan sites into hospitals. Their ability to pivot without losing core identity speaks to a universal truth: resilience isn't about refusing change, but reshaping it. Today's activists, entrepreneurs, and artists echo this instinct, turning constraints into catalysts. The Vestal's flame may have been extinguished, but its heat lingers. In every woman who's turned scrutiny into strength, every leader who's rewritten the rules while appearing to follow them. Their legacy isn't just in what they lost, but in what they dared to claim. Imagine waking before dawn to tend a fire that must never die, knowing one careless moment could bring disaster upon an entire empire. Or spending decades memorizing rituals so secret, even a whispered mistake might anger the gods. The Vestal Virgins' lives were woven with duties that tested mind, body, and spirit, but which challenge would unravel you. Would the crushing weight of purity rituals feel most unbearable, every meal scrutinized, every hairstyle judged? Picture preparing the sacred mola salsa bread, where a single grain spilled might be seen as an omen of famine. Or perhaps the isolation would cut deepest, watching siblings marry and have children while you kept a vow of chastity for 30 years, your own family, now the city itself. Some might crumble under the political tightrope walk, one moment pardoning a prisoner with a touch, the next navigating emperors' egos, aware that a misstep could turn yesterday's ally into tomorrow's accuser. History whispers of Vestals who mastered this dance, Junia Torquata soothing Tiberius' temper, Oxia advising Augustus, but others, like Cornelia, learned how quickly favor could burn to ash. Or maybe the true test lay in the silent battles, the itch of wool robes in summer heat, the ache of knees on temple marble during all-night vigils, the gnawing fear that despite your sacrifices, Rome's mobs might still turn on you when harvests failed. Yet for all these trials, some duties shimmer with unexpected beauty, crafting garlands for Vestalia from flowers you grew yourself, their petals strewn across the Tiber in a ceremony so ancient even the gods might pause to watch. Teaching wide-eyed girls the art of reading smoke patterns, their hands steadying under yours as they learn to listen to the fire. And then there's the flame itself, not just a chore, but a living thing you shelter like a child, its light painting the temple walls with stories no scroll could capture. So tell us, where would your breaking point lie? In the unrelenting scrutiny, the loneliness, the terror of becoming a scapegoat for forces beyond your control? Or would you find strength in the sacred rhythms, your life given meaning by something greater than yourself? Drop your thoughts below, and let's keep the conversation burning as bright as Vesta's eternal fire. The Vestal Virgins were far more than keepers of a flame. They were the living pulse of Rome, women who wielded sacred authority in a world built for mortal men. Their story isn't just about rituals and relics. It's a masterclass in navigating impossible contradictions. They were both revered and policed, powerful yet bound. Their lives a testament to how influence can flourish even within the tightest constraints. Think about it. In a society where most women were legal extensions of their fathers or husbands, Vestals owned property, testified in court, and intervened in matters of state. They dined with emperors yet slept in guarded dormitories, their bodies celebrated as sacred vessels even as their individuality was erased beneath white robes and ceremonial braids. What makes their legacy so enduring isn't just their spiritual role, but their humanity. Behind the marble statues and ancient texts, we catch glimpses of real women, like the Vestal who smuggled scrolls to safety during invasions, or the one who secretly funded her nephew's education, her love tucked between the lines of ledgers. Theirs was a life of extraordinary privilege and profound sacrifice, a balancing act few could sustain. And when their order finally fell, it wasn't because they failed, it was because Rome itself had changed, trading one kind of fire for another. So the next time you pass a candle's flame or feel the warmth of a hearth, remember the women who tended a light that outlasted kings and empires. Their story challenges us to rethink what power looks like, who gets to hold it, and how easily it can be extinguished. If you've ever wondered which aspect of their lives resonated most, the rituals, the politics, or the quiet rebellions, drop a comment below. And if you're hungry for more hidden histories, hit subscribe. The past is full of voices waiting to be heard. All we have to do is listen. Until then, keep chasing the embers of forgotten stories. You never know what they might